Okay, well, yeah, in short, I mean, I'll keep it brief when we get started with the panel, but just a recap. I'm an environmental artist and I'm researching how human creativity and emerging technology can serve nature. And that took me to all corners of the climate debate. And what I'm most passionate about is bringing artists and creatives together to shape the cultural transformation of this topic, and then obviously supporting them practically via green financing initiatives. And today, I'd love to now ask every speaker to introduce themselves before we dive into a very juicy discussion, starting with Michael.
So hi everyone, I'm Michael Mazur. I'm one of the co-founders of the Urban Change Protocol based in New York City. Super excited to be here. So my work has been on focusing on incentives as a way to get people to take actions to support sustainable and environmental goals. And super excited about this field and very passionate, and I've been doing this for the past 8 years or so. So excited to be here and talk more.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Radoslav Dragov, head of validation for the Open Forest Protocol. Essentially what we do is we are trying to accelerate reforestation in different parts of the world, especially to the benefit of low-income countries. I come from the Web3 space, been there since 2017, but since 2020 I've slowly moved into the sustainability ESG area, and I've never looked back. And I think there's a huge potential of combining Web3 with sustainability. So glad to be here for this discussion.
Lovely. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Mulligan. I'm an interdisciplinary researcher. I have been working in technology for over 25 years, and I studied engineering for sustainable development in 2005. So I was a bit ahead of the curve on understanding we need to take care of the planet, and that was the result of several trips to the North Pole, where I was doing climate change research, supporting them, technical support. Today I work on all aspects of applying digital technologies into sustainability, and I've been working with blockchain since 2009, and I'm really, really interested in how blockchain can transform the way our economic system functions.
Hi everybody, my name's Kirsteen Harrison. I am a climate and sustainability specialist. It's what I trained in 20 years ago and what I've worked in since. I've always worked with businesses in various sectors, and for the past 4 years I've done a significant amount of work in the blockchain space on climate in particular. So I'm here today in my capacity as sustainability advisor for Zebu, and Zebu is a blockchain technology company. We're based in the UK. We are both compliance-led and sustainability-led, and we work with enterprises to help them embed blockchain solutions.
Amazing, thank you. Well, without much talking, I'd like to start with a quote to set the vibe before we go into a specific discussion. I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, apathy, and to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation, and we, lawyers and scientists, don't know how to do that. And this came from Gus Speth, who's a top environmental lawyer, top US climate advisor, Ivy League professor, all sorts of serious sounding things. And this coming from him is a very interesting quote, and I would like us to try to remember that as we begin our discussion. And with this in mind, I'm turning to our climate transformation agents, because that's who you are, with some questions. Starting at the very end there with Kirsteen. Money makes the world go round. So let's start with Zebu money. And the question is, can you take us through a snapshot of where businesses operating in Web3 are on the sustainability journey? Like, where are we? What's the bird's eye view?
That's hard to do in a snapshot. So my bird's eye view might be different from the rest of you, because I come from outside of the blockchain and Web3 space, and I've come into it as a sustainability specialist, and I think it gives me a bit of a different perspective, right? And so the way I talk about this in a simple sense is that businesses are on this kind of spectrum. The journey to being sustainability is a never-ending one, and really there's a spectrum from doing harm and doing nothing sustainable to being less bad and trying to do a bit that's good. to kind of doing no harm, and then at the brilliant end of the spectrum, we've got full regeneration, right? And that whole spectrum is represented in the Web3 space, and you would expect that because no particular sector is doing really well in everything. So I think we represent that entire spectrum. I think the innovation, though, within Web3 is very much at the regeneration end because the technology is so well suited to that. I guess talking as a non-tech person, my observation with Web3 as well is that the skill sets we have within it are really unique to help accelerate the sustainability agenda. So by nature, we're very entrepreneurial. We've created entire new sectors that didn't exist a few years ago, and we've created new businesses, new technologies, new ways of working, and we need that entrepreneurial spirit to move the sustainability agenda as fast as it can go. We also need the kind of risk accepting attitude. I think within Web3, we're actually very good at accepting risk as a big part of the path that we need to go on. And sustainability transformation is not going to come around from being risk averse because we need transformational change. So that wasn't a snapshot, but my snapshot is we're all on this spectrum. We can't pat ourselves too much on the back yet, but we have exactly the right mindsets, approaches, and attitudes to be a leader in this area.
Thank you. And perhaps we can zoom in onto one of those innovative companies working in regeneration space. I'm looking at Rado here from Open Forest Protocol. You have a very complex task of working with reforestation, afforestation, and forestation projects because these are large-scale, geographically diverse, and kind of long-term projects. And planting trees has a number of benefits and obviously challenges as well. But the question is, how can we trust the measured impact and how can Web3 help there? Because we all know that planting trees is key, but there's a lot more to it than just putting a seed in the ground.
Yeah, certainly. Well, trust is paramount in our industry and can make or break a project. So just to set the scene here, we at the Open Forest Protocol work with forest projects, no surprise here. But in the voluntary carbon market. So long story short is essentially if you want to start a forest project, you plant trees. Those trees capture CO2, which of course is contributor to global warming. But you need an organization to measure that impact and then certify the results of that impact. And it comes in the form of carbon credits. Now, those carbon credits can be sold to companies around the world that want to neutralize their carbon footprint. And hopefully that creates a virtuous cycle where more and more people plant trees because they're paid for selling those carbon credits. So that's a crash course in the voluntary carbon market. We came into this market when we saw there was a lot of, let's say people were behind the times. It was very low-tech, very manual, very expensive, and therefore inaccessible. So we will leverage the principles of Web3 and use other technologies such as remote sensing to make it much more accessible. We've also, one of the big problems is the lack of transparency in the current system. If you want to buy carbon credits, you basically have to trust the reputation of the organization that has issued them. So you cannot see the underlying information. We're doing exactly the opposite. So all the very sensitive information, it is publicly available. So when you buy carbon credits, you just don't have to trust us. You can do your due diligence if you want to. And of course, the carbon credits are minted on a blockchain, so they're entirely traceable back to the project from which they came from. And last but not least is we have a decentralized network of validators that actually audit the data that's submitted on the ground. So these are different validators. These are not the blockchain validators that you used to. These are highly specialized companies, remote sensing companies, forestry experts, forest fire detection, climate data providers, and they independently assess the information that's submitted on the ground, and they make a determination whether a particular project should get carbon credits or not. And it's about aggregating that decision is kind of the secret sauce. So to kind of, and we think when using this decentralized system, this Web3 approach, we think you create a system which is much more resilient to any attempts at cheating or foul play. So in short, we are very transparent, and I think that decentralized system of validators really help ensure there's a lot of trust in the system.
Thank you. Moving away from the system, so zooming out, from kind of big picture to an individual, from a forest to a tree, maybe. Looking at Michael here, and your work that very much focuses on urban environments and individual action, because that's also a big conversation in climate, is what do we as people, what are we responsible for? So, question I have for you is, can you tell us about your innovative approaches to motivating individuals to take the right ecological actions?
Yeah, 100%. So a lot of the work that we do is focused on incentives, right? And how do you actually reward people for taking actions that do good for the environment, right? So a lot of times you can think about the actions that we take in our daily habits, right? So it's recycling, maybe it's taking public transportation, maybe it's riding our bikes. But ultimately, why are we doing it? And one of the biggest analogies that I'll use is that, even if we are, let's say, very sustainable in our mindset, if there's no incentive and no awareness, we're ultimately not going to create a behavioral change. So a lot of the work that we do is working with cities and organizations to create a model where those cities and organizations can reward people for taking actions that are aligned with the goals of the organization or of the city. So just another example here, think about an organization or company that wants its employees to recycle and to take their bike to work instead of driving their car. The blockchain is very helpful here because basically what the city can do, or the company can do, is that they can say, okay, any person that rides their bike to work or that recycles can show proof that they did it. That's where the blockchain is great. And once that proof is available and validated, they can then earn this local coin or local token. Now, what's interesting about the way that we work is that those local coins can only be used at local businesses or white-labeled businesses that the entity that funds those coins can select. And the unique thing here with this sort of circular closed-loop economy is that you're essentially creating positive behavior in a way that has awareness and that people will continue doing and engaging in that behavior even when that incentive is gone. So definitely with measuring impact, I think that's very important, and that's where we talk about transparency a lot. That's where I think there's a huge potential in the upcoming decades with blockchain.
Thank you. I think there's a missing piece on the puzzle to everything we've heard so far, and that is governments, institutions, and various legacy players. So I'm going to look at Kathy here and ask you this question. These institutions and legacy players are notoriously difficult to collaborate with and maybe move in with the times, let's just say. So question is, how do you propose that we pave the way for collaboration between all the players, from innovative startups to individuals to governments, especially when they set the tone?
With regards to environmental, yeah. So, I'm probably the oldest person on the panel, so my experience really is, I think it's time we stop bullshitting ourselves, right? And I think we actually have to, within the Web3 space particularly, understand how you actually engage with government and the nature of the discussions that actually need to be taken. By the same token, my personal belief is currently I don't think governments are moving anywhere near fast enough. Most of them are still very beholden to the, as you were saying, the legacy industries. Those legacy industries have huge amounts of money and power. And lobbying power. So they are, in effect, in many instances, controlling the organizations of government, if we're honest with ourselves. I think there's two options, right? We can try and work with the system, or we can try and build an alternative system alongside. And that's a little bit of the work or the research that I do, where I look at how we can use small-scale activities to create larger-scale impact. So how can we connect the smaller activities within Web3 together to actually have large-scale impact? Does anyone here actually think, hands up, who thinks Web3 has actually scaled effectively since its start in, say, 2010? That's one person. Yeah, so I think one of the things that Web3, and that's particularly the people in this space, can do is work out how to work together. So there's the traditional organization methods where you'd use standards, right? Traditionally, we'd use standardization in order to create this sort of group momentum. That's how we created 5G, 4G, 3G, 2G, if any of you are old enough to remember that one. But you could do the same thing with Web3, but in a much more loosely coupled manner. So that's one of the things I think Web3 should be thinking about.
Thank you. Well, and now moving to the next piece, looking at Kirsteen here and businesses. Zumo has worked hard to integrate sustainability into its business strategy. Can you tell us more about the hurdles that Zumo experienced or other partners in your ecosystem, and how did they overcome these?
Yes, I can. There are hurdles. So at Zebu, we had been on this journey for quite some time. So we've been looking at the carbon footprint and electricity consumption of blockchains for about 4 years now, really since we were founded. And at the time that we started looking, there was very little in the way of guidance or work that had been done. There was a few kind of academic papers, but they hadn't been interpreted into anything that was usable by businesses. So we, in the early days, had a huge challenge that we know we needed to do something. We wanted to do it very much in line with guidance. We didn't want to go out on our own and do it, but there wasn't really anything that existed within the sector. And so the way that we approached that was to become a part of all the discussions that were happening, and we got on various working groups and we were involved in producing a number of bits in industry guidance. The biggest hurdle, I would say, is slightly ironic. From an environmental sustainability perspective, if you're looking at your carbon footprint as a Web3 company, and particularly within the blockchain sector, the decentralization causes challenges. So within carbon footprinting, what you would normally do is to look at your entire value chain carbon footprint. Normally what you do is engage with your supply chain. And in a decentralized network, you can't engage with your supply chain, or you can't directly engage with your suppliers. Now, we started off this journey with Bitcoin, which I think, as we all know, is a particularly big user of electricity. It's of all the cryptocurrencies, it uses the most. And direct engagement with Bitcoin miners doesn't really work because Bitcoin's entirely fungible. So that presented a really complex challenge for us. We haven't yet fully managed to overcome that, but the way that we work with that now is actually to procure renewable electricity that is equal to that which we as Zumo are responsible for. And we've actually, within the last few months, launched a product, Oxygen, which allows us to do that for our clients, because we were increasingly being asked by financial institutions, asset managers, etc., to do that. So I guess the moral to that is, yes, there are challenges, but you've got to be brave and face them, because challenges can become an opportunity. And if you don't face the challenges and don't find solutions, then you're not taking risks, you're not innovating, and you're not going to be kind of getting ahead in this area. So for us, we found a positive outcome from it.
And governments and institutions take decades to get anywhere or change anything. The fact that Ethereum switched fairly quickly in a couple of years, as an example, is already very good. So at least in our industry, we can move fast. So there is some hope. But going back to the people here, want to look at Rado and ask you about low-income countries, as you mentioned, and indigenous communities, because this is a known fact that climate change will affect those people in those geographies, and they're not as equipped perhaps to deal with these matters. So the question is, how can either Open Forest Protocol or Web3 in general, in your opinion, support these communities, and how have you?
Yeah, it is a tragedy that the people who have least contributed to climate change will likely be the ones that are worst affected. We have about, right now it's close to 90 projects, forest projects in different parts of the world, but the vast majority are in those low-income developing countries. I think the best way we can help them is basically lowering the barrier to entry in the voluntary carbon market so they can benefit from it. As I explained earlier, we talked about legacy systems. The current approach is very kind of rooted in the past, is very manual and therefore very expensive. And typically you need over 1,000 hectares of land to reforest in order to get started. Of course, very, very few people have access to that. But by leveraging new technology and using, well, Web3 as well helps, it is really lowering the barrier to entry. So even if you're a farmer with 1 hectare of land, you can get started. And the trees, well, trees grow from decades. So if you have this patch of land that has trees that are growing, you can have a passive income that lasts for decades. And of course, $1 there can carry you much further than, let's say, here. So it does make a difference in the lives of people. We are also supporting agroforestry projects, meaning that you can plant trees, so you have basically double or 2 sources of income. One is the fruits or nuts that you're selling, and the other is the carbon credit that you're getting from the trees just growing. So this really reduces the incentive to cut down the trees because it's reality of life there. You know, it's a matter of survival in many cases, so you cut down trees to get timber or to make charcoal. So supporting this agroforestry project has really helped. We're actually doing now a big agroforestry project with the government of Zambia. Another example, recent one, is with a women-led organization in Kenya. Again, it's an agroforestry project, and we had a webinar last week, and I think the quote there that really stuck in my mind is, she said, well, for us, carbon means hope. So it was very, very touching, and they're really happy to bring more projects on board. When it comes to indigenous people, again, we recently had a project. It was in Guatemala by the Maya tribe. And well, in the past, they obviously, for obvious historical reasons, not very trustful of outside organizations. There are a lot of intermediaries when it comes to doing these projects, so barely anything is left for them. But they were really happy to do this because we allow them. And I think a good system should remove the intermediaries and give complete control to the people on the ground. So they own the wallet, they decide. So all the proceeds that they're getting will be distributed among the local community. So hearing those stories, and there are not very few of them, there are many of them, I would say it's the most gratifying part of my work. So yeah, it is, it does make you happy when you hear those stories.
Yeah, I know. I remember last year we were in the same panel where we also remember the most memorable thing was the human factor and the benefits that individual people can receive from doing the right thing. Well, on a controversial note, and the people, I want to ask Michael something. It's a very well-researched fact that humans have a hard time changing their behaviors, especially when you tell them what not to do. You know, don't eat meat, don't take long-haul flights, don't drive cars, have fewer children. Just don't, no. And that's something that people are not likely to embrace very easily. So the question here is, have any Web3 experience journey design tips or any kind of ideas on how we may bake these positive behavior changes into our designs?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I mean, we just in the word positive, right? A lot of times we talk about the carrot versus the stick. In a lot of countries and communities, a lot of times, like you're saying, it's don't do this, don't do that. From our perspective at Urban Change and the work that we've been doing, it's actually saying, let's look at the opposite side, right? Let's look at incentives and let's look at rewards to encourage people to take actions in a way that creates a longer-term behavioral change. Now, what does that behavioral change mean? If one person recycles, fine, that's great. But if you have tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people recycling, that's where you can really make an impact. Now, when we talk about Web3 and we talk about everything that this industry has been through in the past couple of years, a lot of times, right, it is bullshit. And there's a lot of things that are, we call it greenwashing, rainbow washing with the UN SDGs. And where we want to see a lot of impact being made, especially with Web3, is who has a willingness to pay for the incentives in order to create a better future. Now, who are those options? We see a lot of times it's municipalities, right, local governments who have enormous budgets where there often is not transparency, there often is not accountability to make sure that those budgets are translated into true action. And Blockchain is great in that sense because blockchain can be a way to validate and verify actions. So essentially, kind of like carbon credits, there's a way to quantify, measure, and then have sort of a framework that creates a certificate, right, that can represent an action. The other entity that's quasi-willing to pay is companies. In Europe, in the EU, we talk more about the CSDR requirements and ways and regulations that companies will now have to report not only their financial metrics, but also their social and environmental metrics, right? So companies should have accountability so that their employees and their teams will be also taking actions, right? They should recycle. They should take public transportation to work and not their car. And they probably should also be rewarded for it. So I think Web3 has an enormous potential, especially when it comes to the tokenization, validation, and models to make it immutable so that we can truly represent outcomes with impact and actions that are made. And so, yeah, that's why we're very excited and see a lot of potential here as well.
Thank you. Well, sounds exciting. The future might be bright, definitely warm. Speaking of the future, question for Kathy. Can you please look into your crystal ball and tell us how the Goliaths of the world, institutions, World Economic Forum, governments, all of those players, how would they be looking to work with blockchain players with regards to the environmental question? Anything coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, so, well, I guess CSRD is a big one, actually, in Europe, definitely. And that fundamentally changes. So, the question about Web3 being able to move fast, when regulation moves, it really moves, and it really actually does catch up with things. So CSRD will have a fundamental impact on any company who is trying to sell into any large company across Europe. So if you are not able to prove your environmental, social, and economic impacts, you won't be able to be selling into a lot of companies in Europe. So it's a fundamental shift there. So that's one thing that is coming down the line. That's what 2024 is, the first reporting period. So it does become extremely urgent for everybody, including those in the Web3 space, to be able to do the things that Kirsteen was talking about measuring the impact of your solutions. In terms of how do the Goliaths move, or where are they moving? So without mentioning any particular organization specifically, I think because of a shift in how, shall we say, money is moving in the world, and don't forget, a lot of these organizations are partnership organizations, so they are reliant on money from companies to continue activity. I think we're seeing a shift much more towards how you can actually use these within the traditional financial system. So we're seeing a big shift towards CBDCs from the large players. And honestly, I think that's one of the biggest threats to the traditional, what I call the traditional Web3 community, which is the push by, the Bank of International Settlements to, implement CBDCs rather than cryptocurrency, because they are literally so afraid of it, to be perfectly honest. What we've created here is extraordinarily scary because it's a challenge to the status quo of money. And if you ask yourself about that, has anyone ever actually, just quickly, has anyone ever actually asked themselves, what is money? One person, hey, nice, great. 2, 3, 4, yeah, and yourself, yeah. I mean, very simply, money is debt. It is not actually what you think it is. Money is debt, and it makes the world go around through the debt process. So if you, for example, if you pay off your mortgage, your credit rating goes down. Did you know that? That's because you're no longer in debt. You're no longer part of the system. Anyway, that's me ranting. I'll stop on that bit. So what's coming down the line? I think we're seeing a big shift towards CBDCs, but there's nothing that stops the Web3 community building your own institutions. There's nothing that stops you doing that, and maybe it's time to think about that, and then maybe it's time for those institutions to start interacting with one another, for example. Yeah.
I like that. That's great. Well, the last question is for all of you. Nice little kind of one-liners. I mean, this sounds a bit optimistic, but let's end on a realistic note here, since we're in a bear market. So in your opinions, so each one of you, in your opinions, what can we try, What do you think we cannot achieve, and what should we try to achieve? Let's a little bit of focus here. One-liners.
I think what we can not achieve is enormous projects happening at a very quick and short time, meaning it'll have to be a long, evolved, gradual play. What we can achieve, I think, is, I guess it's the inverse of what I'm saying, but it's gradual change that's done because of an economically viable model and business models that actually work and make sense to multiple parties.
Okay. What we cannot do, we have to be part of the solution. I mean, there's never one solution that solves a big problem. So yes, we have to be part. We are a small but a meaningful part of the solution. So we have to be realistic about that. But everybody working together at the end of the day in many different fields is how you achieve results. And as he said, it will take time, but working together will help.
Okay, so I don't think we can convince the traditional financial system to respond in time to respond to the climate crisis. We can do one of two things. We can either overthrow it, or we can show an alternative path for humanity to use. So revolution. So.
I like that. We'll do the question after. One last answer.
So I guess to me, Web3 is not the panacea. It's a tool, or more accurately, a collection of tools. And that really is what Web3 is. And all tools can be used for good or for bad. You can use a hammer to fix things, or you can use a hammer to kill somebody. And I think we need to be under no illusion that that whole spectrum, back to my original point, that whole spectrum is available to us with Web3. And what we need to do through the institutions that we may build and through everything else is make sure that we're using it for good. And I'm fully confident that we can do that for all the reasons that I said before. We've got the right people, the right mindsets, we've got the ambition, we've got the risk-taking, we've got the entrepreneurial spirit, all of these things that we really, really need. But that dose of reality is really needed too. This will only be a really good thing for the world, for us, if we make it that way, and that's what we need to do.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we have time for one question. There was a man with a question. Do you need a microphone, or do you want to shout?
I can try to shout, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for all your information. It's very valuable, and so I do appreciate what you do, like each one of your sides. And my question is going to be like pretty simple. Do we have enough time in terms of what do we do? How much time do we got in terms of like when the shit hits the fan, and when we don't have fresh air, when the numbers on the crypto world don't matter anymore, and when what do we do? I mean, apart from sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so actually it's one area of my research that I've been looking at a lot, right? How do you continue to have connectivity, but ensure that people are able to work in loosely coupled sort of formats? So for example, let me put that into real words for you. If the food supply chain breaks, which quite literally it probably is going to do very, very soon, actually much sooner than we thought, right? Anyone who's been working in this space, what are the tools and mechanisms whereby which we can create localized food supply chains? And I think digital actually can play a critical role in what we would classify as the traditional supply chain problem of supply and operations, right? So how do you smoothing supply and demand, so we don't get bullwhip effects across what I would classify as a micro supply chain. I've spent about 15 years researching on that. Everyone thought I was completely insane, but I actually think we're going to need these types of mechanisms and tools, because I don't think it's moving fast enough. But the climate change is moving significantly faster than it's 16 degrees above average in Australia right now. 16 degrees, it's insane. There's no olives in Spain. wheat has failed, rice has failed globally. It's only a matter of time. So we're going to have to go back to a more traditional way of living, which is more localized, but we don't want to lose that global interconnectivity, and I think it's possible, but I think it's going to be individuals. Sorry, I'll shut up.
Can I maybe add one point to that? And I did see that we're at time, but I think this is a really important point. I'm often asked the question about how much time have we got and is it worth it? Can we achieve what we need to achieve? And I actually think we need to really shift our mindsets in the way we think about this, because if we see this as an egg timer, that when it stops, that's it, you know, we have sudden catastrophe, that allows us complacency, and that can't happen. We can't be complacent. We can't allow ourselves to think that we run out of time when we become ineffective. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, how bad are we willing to let it get? And it's getting quite bad already, and it will continue to get worse. And I think if we can frame the question in that way and continually challenge ourselves, then that allows us to not give up and not let other people give up too.
Is this a one-liner?
I just want to say that people react to incentives, and there will be no point is like you're off the cliff. Things get progressively worse, and as people see that in their daily lives, hopefully, and I think that will happen, people and politicians as well will change their actions.
In short, have your heart in the right place and a revolution. Thank you.
Thank you.